Welcome to Short and to the Point, a podcast from the Comeback in Awful Announcing. Here's your host, Jessica Kleinschmidt.
Hi, everyone. Jessica Kleinschmidt here. Welcome back to another episode of Short and to the Point on Awful Announcing. Michelle Smallmon joins me from Unsportsmanlike on ESPN Radio. I'm just finishing up my third season, kind of going more in the radio direction, evening out all my TV stuff. And I'm really excited for next season. I'll be doing everything. Really excited to kind of do all of that, being a five-tool player. And she's the perfect person to pick her brain because she's so damn talented. And I think it's important to have somebody around my age to pick her brain about sports radio because just how versatile she is and showing her talents off. Because I think when people look at sports radio, they just think of sitting in a booth somewhere, putting headphones on and talking into a mic, which is a part of it for sure. But the way that she goes about her art is just awesome. And she's so, like I said, she's so talented, and listening to her show and when she works with her co-host Canty and Evan, it's just awesome to watch and listen because there's a video element as well. So we talked about her background growing up in St. Louis, which is not only a hardcore sports town, but a really hardcore Cardinals town. And of course, your girl's a baseball girl. So I wanted to pick her brain about that. She came out of the womb a Cardinals fan. So of course you had to pick her brain about that. We also talked about the mess that is the New York Jets. So that was an interesting subject to talk about as well. So here's our chat. All right. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to Short and to the Point. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I was so excited to have you on because you have this St. Louis background and it's a sports town, but specifically, I saw one time somebody wrote something on you and there was a quote from you that said death, taxes, and Cardinal baseball. And I feel like there's nothing more accurate to describe that area. When you're raised in a city like that, tell me what it's like to be a Cardinals baseball fan and to live by that quote.
So I always say that Cardinals baseball is like a member of the family in St. Louis. The Cardinals have a seat at the dinner table. And what I mean by that is that it's such a fabric of the community there. It's so intertwined in our day-to-day life. It affects our moods. It affects our hope. It affects our bank accounts. It is just such an omnipresent thing for people in St. Louis. You come out you come into the world essentially, and you are born a Cardinals fan, and it dictates a lot of what you do in St. Louis. So right now, there's a lot of people in St. Louis that aren't having a good time. They don't feel great about the state of the Cardinals, which is a foreign feeling for a lot of people. But you grow up where sports in general, but more specifically baseball, really matters. And it's something that is really cool to have, especially with a long season like baseball is. You just always have something bigger than you that brings the community together, and that matters.
Walk me through, it's a Wednesday day game. You just finished a Cubs series. Cardinals they lose the series. What's that Wednesday like at home when the Cardinals lose to the Cubs that series?
Well, you never want to lose to the Cubs. They're the hated rival. And that will be something that not only makes you bummed out, but that you're going to want to relive over and over and over again. And by that, I mean, Cardinals fans don't just watch the game, turn off the TV, and then they say, oh man, I can't believe we lost to the Cubs. They're going to turn into one-on-one ESPN, and they're going to want to hear why it went wrong. They're going to want to call into the show and participate. They're going to want to hold someone accountable. Even if it's in the springtime, you're doing the math of like, okay, let's look at the schedule and let's figure out when the Cardinals will face the Cubs next. How many more division games do we have? How does this impact us moving forward? It is one of those things where people live and die by every pitch and every single game. So you never want to lose any games, but especially not to the Chicago Cubs. That's not something that should ever happen in St. Louis.
I agree. It's like a whole different thing. And one of my favorite things about the post-game shows for radio is when the callers get to call in. It's such a beautiful thing. And I've heard you talk about the transparency of sports radio, and it's more intimate. And that's what the beauty is of that. And you get more time. When it comes to the callers for St. Louis in that area, how would you describe the passion fan to call, whether it's a loss or a win?
I would say that the callers in St. Louis are always going to be informed. It is a sports town that takes their sports very seriously. So they're watching the games, they know about the games, they know the teams very intimately. And because of that knowledge that they have, they're always going to have a passionate take on something. But I would describe it as polite anger in St. Louis because let's again use the Cardinals currently as an example. The standard in St. Louis is that year after year, you should be winning a World Series. And if you don't, it's considered a failed season. Now, the Cardinals over the past decade plus have had a lot of very good baseball teams, but the results last year were not good enough. And they're going to continue to probably be not good enough for a while because the team has a lot of tough decisions to make. The complexity of the team is going to look much, much different moving forward. But Cardinals fans have had enough of that. They are fed up and they're going to call into those shows and they're going to let you know how they feel about the team. But now being here in New York City and being on the East Coast and listening into New York sports talk radio or Boston sports talk radio and Philly sports talk radio, they're going to come on and yell. They're going to be very angry. They're going to use some colorful language. Cardinals fans aren't necessarily going to do that. They're going to let you know that they're displeased, but they're not going to have that same anger the way that East Coast fans do. But make no mistake, they are very serious about their standards with Cardinals baseball.
Yeah, I bet. You, speaking of callers on your show, you had somebody call in not that long ago. And obviously when the Rams left your beloved St. Louis to the West Coast, you were not going to follow them as far as your fandom goes. And that's very respectful. And it wasn't on a surface level. And I really respected that. And you talked about the economic impact of that. You talked about people that you knew losing their jobs. And I thought it was really cool that you mentioned that. But you also said people didn't come up to you and really ask you like why this actually happened. And I thought that was really important. You talked to Gus on the call. Why was it important for you to talk about not just the impact, but more of the specifics of what went into this move?
Yeah, when Gus called in to Unsportsmanlike to challenge me on not sticking with the Rams after they left St. Louis, I don't know if he knew what he was in for because that became a big moment on our show. And it was really important for me to defend my city for a couple reasons. One, I love it. I love St. Louis. And I think that St. Louis is oftentimes a misunderstood place. And number two, when you read a lot about the Rams going back to LA, you don't get a lot of the story of how it impacted the city and what the city actually did in an effort to keep the team. And when Stan Kroenke, who was a Missouri guy, ripped the Rams out of St. Louis and moved to LA, it had nothing to do with the city. It had nothing to do with the fan base. It was all about his own personal economics. And St. Louis fought very hard to keep the team. They had the land, they had the sponsorships, they had the renderings. They did everything needed in the NFL's relocation guidelines in order to keep their team, and ultimately it didn't happen. And in the wake of that, when Stan Kroenke left town, he said some very disparaging things about the city as sports fans and other franchises' potential viability there. And that is like taking something that is so important to a city and their identity, one of the things that they're the very best at, and weaponizing it against them incorrectly. St. Louis is an incredible sports town. And it's not just with the Cardinals. It's with any sport. It's with the Blues. When the Rams were there, people showed up. You see it with the St. Louis Battlehawks now. Anytime there's sporting events across all sports, they break attendance records. We saw it with the PGA Championship. We saw it with the Olympic gymnastic trials. I could go on and on and on. It's a place that takes sports very seriously and that supports sports. So for someone like Gus to call in and question that, I, of course, had a passionate and visceral reaction to that, but I also thought that it was a great opportunity for me to give a little bit more insight into St. Louis and how it was not their fault in why the Rams left. And that obviously was being shown with the NFL and Stan Kroenke having to pay $790 million to the city after the lawsuit was settled.
Well, and I thought it was also cool because you could have taken almost the surface level, and it's different when you're working for a network like ESPN as opposed to maybe working for the team. You could have just kind of pushed it aside and said, yeah, I understand. But you were able to not only defend yourself, but take a journalistic approach as well. So you were able to find those balances. And since it was your city, you were able to just have the kind of the fan background and the fact that you lived there. Did that feel good after that?
So in the moment, I kind of blacked out, if we're being honest. It came from
That's when you
deep
know it's
inside
good.
my
I
soul.
love that.
It's something that anyone in my life here in a workspace can tell you is very important to me, and something that I feel very, very passionately about, because when you know the truth about a situation and you're hearing all of this stuff outside of the truth that's just being regurgitated as if it's fact, it gets very frustrating. And I have for a very long time in various roles been banging the table being like, hey, there's a deeper story here to what happened to St. Louis. This is not just me being Harriet the Homer, which I definitely am, don't get me wrong, but this is me telling you that you need to look into this. The situation that happened with St. Louis, it's different than what happened with San Diego. It's different than what happened with Oakland. And the NFL had a set of relocation guidelines that they did not adhere to. And I just really wanted that story to be told. And in that moment, it's like, I couldn't even tell you what I said right after that, but I was hosting with Freddie Coleman at the time. And I remember looking over to him and his face was like, what is going on? Because usually I'm not that pointed in my response to people. And I still, of course, wanted to be respectful to Gus, who called in with a legitimate question. And we're so appreciative of anyone that listens to or watches the show and takes the time and effort to call in and converse with us. But I definitely want to let Gus know that there's a good reason why people from St. Louis do not support the Rams anymore and will not support them ever again.
And there's the respect factor there, right? Like I think anybody could just hop on and say, oh, we're just going to follow them forever, because there's still the structure there that, like, there's still some people there that worked for them in St. Louis. Cause you could easily just hop on there and say, oh, I'm just going to follow them. I think there's a respect factor there to not follow them to the West Coast.
Absolutely. Why would you support someone or an organization that does not support you and that is very vocal about not wanting to be with you anymore? And that's why I made the comparison with Gus, like a marriage or a relationship.
Yeah.
If we went to brunch and you're telling me about some guy who went on that you dated and that you loved, you had a great relationship with, and then you break up and he goes all over social media and is like, oh, Jessica's the worst. I can't believe I ever dated her, and just really blast you. All of us at brunch are going to be like, you can't go back to him. What are you talking about? This person did you dirty. Why would you ever consider going back to them? And that's exactly what happened with the Rams. They didn't want us. They made it very clear that they don't think we're good enough and they don't want us. So say la vie. Enjoy the sunshine. That's fine. We will support the teams that are in our city. And a lot of people like me who still want to be in the NFL ecosystem have adopted a new team, but it will never be the Rams because we are self-respecting people. And if you don't want us, we don't want you.
I love that. And because of the fact that it was on radio versus TV, I know, like, I've done both, and TV, you imagine putting all of that in like a 30-second hit. Are you kind of glad that you were able to do that on radio? Because maybe TV, you wouldn't have been able to get that opportunity to say as much as you could in a more intimate setting too.
That's such a good point, because in radio, you do have more of a runway to make a point and to expand on thoughts. And I can't remember exactly when that happened, that call, but I believe it was at the beginning of the segment. So I know I have enough time to listen to Gus, to respond to him, and I'm not up against a hard out. That's the technical side of things on TV and radio, where you have to stop talking on a certain second. And in TV, it's much more structured from a formatic standpoint than it is on radio. So we are still on television, but we're a radio show that's on TV. So it does give us much more runway to really expand on our thoughts. So yeah, us being in this specific format definitely helps that cause.
And you're in a new relationship with the Green Bay Packers now. And we know how it came to fruition. It was The Bachelorette. But here's the thing. I kind of got into The Bachelor only because I'm from a small town. Okay. And when it was Becca's season, Garrett won, and he's from Reno. And we found out, because people don't know what an NDA is in Reno. We found out. And so I watched it. And my question is after the whole thing is done and the cameras are gone, everything's done, are you still comfortable with your choice? Because all the flashiness is done. You're not going on these fun little getaways. How are you feeling with your relationship now?
So I feel great about my decision.
Okay.
The Packers are definitely the one.
Okay.
And I'll give you 2 reasons why. Number 1, look at the other 2 teams that were in the top 3, the Chicago Bears and the New York Jets. I could have gone down a very rocky path,
Oh my
at least for
gosh.
this season. Now, when it comes to the Bears, Caleb Williams, still a work in progress. We saw some steps forward with him in that game versus the Packers, but still a question mark with the Bears. And historically, they've been a little dysfunctional. The New York Jets fired their head coach, and they just fired their general manager in Joe Douglas, and now we're having conversations about Aaron Rodgers' time with the Jets being done. It's not Jets, Jets. It's MESS, mess.
Yeah.
So I could have gone down 2 bad paths with the other teams that were in the top 3, but then I'm sitting here with the Green Bay Packers, and not only are they winning games, not only are they still in the playoff / Super Bowl conversation, but I went there and I had my hometown visit, and I just felt like I was at home. It reminded me so much of how St. Louis fans care about their teams. It was, it's in the Midwest. It's beer, it's cheese, it's sports, it's nice people. It just, for me, was the exact place that I needed to be. And it doesn't hurt that the team is also having success in my honeymoon season with them.
I'm thinking about like if the Jets and the Bears were like a guy, and I'm thinking about what their Instagram might look like right now. And we're all looking at it like, I'm so glad she went to the Packers. Like, could you imagine? That would have been so bad. Like the tell-all afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine?
So what does the Jets Instagram look like right now? Are they spiraling? Like they're out
spiraling
at the club. They're
they're
posting
spiraling.
a lot of quotes, like cryptic quotes about the next chapter or people doubting you, things like that. That feels like where the Jets are right now.
Yes. And they're trying to they're for sure doing like a tummy tea campaign or something. Like a tummy.
Totally. And I picture the Bears to be like the gym bro right now.
Yeah.
Like the Bears are trying to make that progress, that step
Not
forward.
totally bad. Not completely bad. Yeah.
Totally. But you're seeing a lot of mirror selfies. You're seeing a lot of deadlift videos. You're seeing a lot of photos of the protein that they're consuming so that that steps are being taken to get where you ultimately want to be.
Yes.
And meanwhile, the Packers are pretty quiet on Instagram.
Yeah.
They will maybe post a photo once or twice of like a highlight of something that they've done, but you don't know a lot about their life. They're pretty mysterious and stable, which we love.
They're in a relationship, but they don't have to flaunt it.
Correct.
So
because they don't need the validation because they know they've got it like that.
So good. You really killed it. I'm really proud of you. I'm really happy for you.
Thank you.
Hashtag goal. Good for you. I'm really glad I have you on the show for a multitude of reasons. When I talk about sports radio, I just got into radio maybe for my 3rd season, and I don't really have people in the same, era as me, a millennial. And so when I'm talking about sports radio, I don't get to talk to people around my age about how it's progressed since I started. So when you're looking at from when you started, now you have the production background. When you see how it's changed over the years from when you started, what comes to mind and how it's kind of evolved?
So many things are different.
Yeah.
I mean, the way that social media has impacted so much of what we do on a day-to-day basis was certainly not the case when I got started. Of course, social media was around, but now we have so many platforms and so many ways that our product can be impacted both positively and negatively. It gives us a lot of opportunity to reach audiences in different sectors, but that means we also have to be on top of all of those different platforms and be on top of actively trying to engage an audience, not only on terrestrial radio, but on television, on YouTube, on obviously social media, on TikTok, on streaming, on podcasts. There's just so many different places for people to find you, which is great, but you also have to be very diligent about serving all of these different people. And I think that also has opened up so many cool opportunities for people that get into the radio space, because it's not just a traditional, hey, you have to have a seat at this table and there's only so many spots for you to be involved in this medium. Now there's so many different opportunities and different ways for you to be involved, which I think is super cool. But at the heart of it, it's still the same. Like, I
Mhm.
love radio because I always say it's the most transparent medium. When you watch television, there's all the bells and whistles, there's the B-roll, there's the graphics, there's the great clothes, and you see all of that. On radio, it's just you and someone else's voice. It's just
Yeah.
you with them for an extended period of time. And you can't fake certain things on radio. You
Mhm.
can't fake who you are. You can't fake chemistry. Um, you don't have just 2 minutes to fill to talk about a game. You have 8 to 12 minute segments 4 times an hour. And for us, 4 hours to do that. So if you're unprepared, you're going to get exposed really quickly. And I think that that's why so many people connect with radio still and connect with any sort of audio medium, because they come for sports, but you really get to see who someone is when you spend time with them in an audio space. And I think they come for sports, and people end up staying for the people that are delivering those
I love
messages.
that. You mentioned 4 hours, and that's a lot. That can be intimidating. That's a lot of time. And obviously there's 3 of you on the show, but you have guests, so you think about those aspects. You bring commercial breaks into it. And so when you think about the amount of time you have to talk, and sometimes you look at the clock and 4 hours goes by, but when you first like were approached with this time slot, when 4 hours came across, did that intimidate you at all?
So I had historically worked mostly on 3 hour shows. When I was
Mhm.
a producer in St. Louis, the second show that I worked on was 4 hours. So I had done it before in a different capacity many years ago. And you don't really understand what an undertaking it is until you get into it.
Yeah.
And 4 hours is a long time to fill. It is
Yeah.
a long time. And you also have to be cognizant of the fact that your audience is turning over all the time.
Yeah.
So it's that really delicate balance between pacing yourself like a marathon, essentially, while also making sure you're constantly freshening up the story of the day, because that's what a lot of people want to hear when they get into their cars, or they turn us on the television. They want to hear about, okay, this is what happened last night, or this is what's happening today, and we want to hear about that. So we want to really continually hit the important notes of the day while also allowing room to have deeper conversations about things. And so I wasn't necessarily intimidated at the outset by 4 hours, but once I got thrown into it, I was like, okay, whoa, this is
Mhm.
a beast. And you have to learn how to prepare yourself. And you have to learn, I know this is going to sound a little strange, but physically how to
Yeah.
handle 4 hours, because we're talking at a performative high level for 4 hours. And if you're if you burn too hot too quick, you could fizzle out as the end of the
Right.
show goes on. You might not have a lot left. So it's about keeping that energy up for the entirety of the 4 hours. Sometimes after the show's over, I just need to sit in darkness for like
Right.
an hour and not speak to anybody or respond to anybody, because it does take a lot out of you.
And tell me a little bit more about that. I'm not trying to say like, oh, I know, but it's interesting because you say 4 hours sitting there talking about everybody thinks that they can do that, right? Like I can just sit
Yeah.
there in front of a mic and do that, but it really does wear you out. So tell me a little bit more about that, because you keep the energy up. It's a grind, and you have to have a certain, and you're also on camera too. So you do have to have
Right.
that in mind as well. So tell me a little bit more about what you have to do and how much that does take a toll on your body.
Yeah, so for us, we try to make sure, and when we structure the show, pace things out a certain way.
Mhm.
So we'll talk about, like, off the top of the show, usually it's the biggest story of the day, and that always is going to elicit just a natural
Mhm.
amount of energy. When, like, for instance, today we're talking about Joe Douglas getting fired as the general manager of the Jets. There's so many tentacles to that story. That one, just at the top of every hour, you're going to have the energy needed,
Mhm.
and everything you need to get through for that story. But then, so we have 4 hours and there's 4 segments per hour. And you work in interviews and that, which is just another voice that gets brought into the conversation, but it's less of an undertaking for myself, Evan, and Canty, as far as what we have to contribute to the conversation. We certainly have to prepare our questions and respond to things that are happening in real time, but it's less of us talking. So
Yeah.
you work those in as far as like the pacing of the show is concerned, not only because it gives us a little bit of a break, but more importantly, it lets the audience hear from another expert or another person who's going to have information or a great opinion that could then prompt another thought from us. So you definitely have to keep stuff like that in mind when you're building out the show, because we would love it if people hang out with us for the entirety of the 4 hours. But the reality is that everybody has a life, and that everybody that's tuning into us is most likely going to work, or they're coming home from work, or they're getting their kids ready to go to school. So that's one thing that we really try to keep in mind as the show goes on, is that a lot of people, it might be 8:45 and we've been doing the show for almost 3 hours, but the person that's tuning in at 8:45, it might be their very first time tuning in that day. So you have to make sure that the energy is right, and that when they come in, they are coming into a really great and powerful conversation.
Yeah, that's true. We talked about like preparing your questions and stuff. I think I read somewhere you referred yourself as type A as far as prepping, and you have the producer background. I have a feeling that helps you in those aspects. How does your production background help in your prep, and what is your prep process? Has that changed over the years, or do you have a certain regime that you stick to?
So I know that everyone takes a different path to get where they want to be in this business, whether it's behind the camera or in front of the camera, or behind the mic in front of the mic. I would strongly suggest that anybody that does ever want to be on the other side of the mic or the camera has a production background. And I can only speak for myself, but it has helped me in more ways than I can count, because when you are a producer, you are building the segments. Of course, your hosts are contributing to that, but you're the one that's pitching ideas. You're the one that's listening on the other side of things, and you can tell when the conversation has gotten stale. You can tell when something needs more energy. You can tell when you need to pivot to a different point. And all of those instincts are really honed as a producer that I feel like I still have now. When we are talking about something for maybe the fourth time during the show, I'll think, okay, we've talked about, for instance, the Jets story. We've talked about how this impacts the Jets right now. We've talked about why they would make this move now. We've talked about Aaron Rodgers. Is this the end of his career? And then I could be thinking in that moment, we haven't, if we're talking about the different topics off of this one storyline, we haven't hit this story about who they should be looking for next. So I can bring that up in conversation. But that's because I've prepared as a producer. I've prepared like I'm the one that's building the rundown every day, because that's the way that I was trained to do it. And I just think that from an instinct standpoint, it has given me valuable skills and tools that I wouldn't have had otherwise. But then I work with a lot of people who did not take that same path to get here, and they have all of those things as well. So it's very much an individual path, but it very much helped me. And I would say that I still prep for the show in a similar way, where I spend hours reading things and making notes on what I think is important. But the difference is when I was a producer, I would make the notes on what I think is important, but send it to the host of the show and hope that that elicited an opinion or a thought from them. And now, as I'm pulling out things from reporting or things that I've read or in watching games that I think is important, instead of sending it off for someone to give an opinion, I have to then form my opinions in that moment. And I always tell my friends, because they'll be like, you're done with the show at 10. What are you doing the rest of the afternoon? And I say, well, I'm preparing to give a 4-hour presentation the next day, because that's really what it is. We don't have a prompter. We don't have a script. So it's like giving a 4-hour presentation every day. And so you want to make sure that you've done the proper research and the reading, and of course, watching the games. But then you want to make sure that you've listened to the sound that's available to you. You want to go through the stats that you have available to you, or that you can pull yourself to maybe emphasize a point if you need it. You need to think, okay, I'm going to make this one point about the Jets or about Aaron Rodgers, but that's only going to fill 30 seconds or a minute. What else can I say after that to really emphasize this point and drive it home? So you're thinking about a lot of different things as you're preparing for the show. And a lot of the stuff that we prepare ends up hitting the cutting room floor. But I know going into a 4-hour show that I need to probably be over prepared in what I need to do that day. And so many things in our show, going back to having the runway to do a radio show, so many things in our show that happen are organic. So many conversations that we have are not prepared. And it's just us listening to one another and then discussing the points that each other makes. And so I feel good that if I've done the prep that I need to do going into that day, that I have a safety net if I need it. And 9 times out of 10, we don't even end up using a lot of stuff that we prep.
And since it's in the mornings, it's kind of interesting. Like, I feel when it comes to the morning shows, like you're kind of raising the kids with people, or you're part of their morning routine. I feel like when my parents raised me, we always had, like, unfortunately, like Rush Limbaugh in the background or whatever, or like driving home, we had these types of things. Does that kind of cross your mind too? Like how kind of intimate that time slot is?
I think about it all the time, and it's
Yeah.
something that I do not take for granted
Oh.
ever. When people say, "Hey, I start my day with you," that means something to us.
Mhm.
You wake up in the morning and you choose to start your day with us. That is a huge responsibility because we're probably going to set the tone for your day in a lot of ways. Whether we say something that makes you laugh, or we say something that makes you think, or we give you a nugget of information that you can then regurgitate at the water cooler that makes you sound smart to your colleagues, or
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
drop in the group chat and make a point with your friends. Those are things we want to do. We want to be an enhancer to people's days. And I just think it's so cool and special that there are tons of people every single morning that wake up and they choose to hang out with us. And I don't it's a weird space to be in though, because we're just three people sitting in a windowless room that talk to each other. We don't get to see everybody that's hanging out with
Mhm.
us. So it is always very humbling and flattering when people take the time out to come up to us or reach out to us and be like, "Hey, I start my day with you." And
Mhm.
you know, I always want to make sure and really thank people because they have a lot of options. You could watch many television shows, listen to many radio shows, listen to podcasts. You could be scrolling social media. And the fact that you choose to hang out with us is very special.
And where do you guys develop this chemistry? It's like you guys, I don't even know how to describe it. It was like when you three get together, there's nobody more perfect for each other, and you guys can learn from each other. It's like you guys finish each other's sandwiches. It's like this perfect balance of each other. How did that happen? It's like it's so perfect.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you saying that, because it does feel like we're in a really good spot. But you never know how that's perceived to people that are tuning in.
Yeah.
So it certainly did not happen overnight. Just like any show or any collective group of people, when you don't know one another, there's a feeling out process. And for the three of us, we had never worked together before. I had done a couple shows with Canty over
Mhm.
the summer, but we were never in the same room. It was always we were in different locations, remote. So I had worked with him and knew that he was great, but I had never been in the same room with him or really had to work with him in a long-term capacity. And with Evan, I had exchanged emails with him before. We had met one another once, but we had never really worked together. I had, of course, listened to his work and thought he was fantastic. But when we first got together in this room and we're kind of looking at each other like, okay, we're going to have to figure each other out.
Mm.
And I think that having a healthy respect for one another
Yeah.
and each other's crafts at the outset certainly helped. And I also think it helped that the three of us are very similar in our mindsets, not only about how we look at the world, but about what we wanted to build together. We wanted this to be a place where people could come for great information, great opinion, great analysis, but we also wanted it to be really fun. The mornings should be fun. People have a lot of serious stuff on their plate that they have to tackle for the day. If you come to us, we're like the toy store of life. We're like the candy
Mhm.
store of life. Sports is supposed to be the fun part of your day. It's supposed to be the thing that brings everybody together. And even if we're talking about your team having a bad performance, maybe that's cathartic to you
Yeah.
to hear that at the beginning of the day. So the three of us don't take ourselves seriously, and we have no problem making fun of each other. And what I really think changed everything for us is we've hung out outside of the show.
Oh, yeah.
We know each other not only just on that set but off the set. And I think once you actually spend time with people and you enjoy them as friends and not just work colleagues, that's when you really get to see that chemistry develop.
I think you can sense that when you're around a team a lot, you can tell when they hang out outside of the clubhouse or the locker room. And
Totally.
watching y'all or even listening to you, you guys kind of play like a basketball team almost. Like you can tell like it's just whether it's feeding each other or like setting up for the shot, it's so natural and it works so well. And I
Thank you.
applaud y'all so much. And I think that's what adds to the element of just making it such a natural listen too. I think that's definitely great. And you guys we're recording this on Wednesday, and you guys were talking about, we were going into the Jets scenario now. And it was a really interesting conversation because you're kind of going down the checklist. It's not necessarily this guy's fault. It's not necessarily that guy's fault. Obviously the firings are happening. You mentioned the GM and head coach Sala, and They had the runway. Everything was happening. It's not Aaron Rodgers' fault, but it's not 100% his fault. When it comes to this scenario, it's so interesting because you guys made the point of, I don't want to say it's a Jets curse, but we can't think of anybody who's really had a successful season on the Jets as of late. But what's going on there? Because do we want to blame it on Woody Johnson, who's been the owner for 25 years? I don't know. But the conversation you guys had was super interesting because it's almost like you can't point a finger at one person, but you can't point it at everybody necessarily. It's such a weird dynamic there.
It is a weird dynamic there. And I think that there's blame to go all the way around. Everybody wants to point to Aaron Rodgers because he came over to the Jets and he got a certain amount of control and a certain amount of say in how things would be built. And it has not been good. It's been really bad over the past 2 years. And I know last year he only played 4 snaps and then he was out for the season, but he's been playing this year and the results have been bad. So he deserves some blame here. Obviously, if you're the head coach of a team, you're going to take some sort of blame for the results, which happened with Rob Saleh. And obviously he's not there anymore.
Yeah.
And then with Joe Douglas, when you look at the record speaks for itself. When we got word yesterday that he was no longer going to be with the Jets, I went back and I looked at the record because I think on the surface, when you think about this Jets group, we kept saying they're a quarterback away. Look at this defense that they have. Look at all this young talent they have. They have the Garrett Wilsons and the Sauce Gardners. Oh, you're going to add an Aaron Rodgers to that equation. This is going to be a great success. But yes, he acquired some good talent on that team, but when you look at the overall record, it's bad. Since 2019, the Jets are tied for the 3rd worst winning percentage in the entire league, only behind, I believe, it's the Jaguars are in the mix and maybe Carolina. So that's not company that you want to be keeping. So he's had a really long runway to turn this thing around and he hasn't gotten it done. But the common thread in all of this has to be the owner. If we're going to give Jerry Jones a lot of heat for the lack of success in Dallas, we have to do the same with Woody Johnson and the Jets.
Yeah, it's the common denominator there. My favorite thing you guys talked about, because I'm a Baltimore girl. This is a Baltimore Ravens household. I live by myself, but it is a Baltimore Ravens household.
Good to know.
Evan was so excited to do this transition of breaking news, which we all do in the radio. We're so excited. We want to do it. Was now that Deion Sanders made his name as far as a head coach, a Hall of Famer. Ray Lewis is trying to do the same thing. Evan, of course, has the background with FAU.
Yeah.
You mentioned relevancy, which I thought was such a beautiful word to describe what Ray Lewis could possibly do to this team. And that's what Deion Sanders did for Colorado. I thought it was so cool that you brought up that word. What would that mean for this club or this organization and just really college football altogether? Could this create a trend?
I definitely think it could, because you're seeing what Deion has done with Colorado specifically. This was an organization that won 1 game, I believe, when he went there the season prior. And even when that hire was initially made, we knew that Coach Prime had been a good coach before. We saw it at Jackson State, but we didn't know how that would translate to a place like Colorado. But right away, we were talking about Colorado. Right away, you saw all of these celebrities and people going to the games and wanting to be affiliated with Coach Prime. They wanted to be involved in what Colorado had going. And now we're definitely seeing more winning and we're seeing more results. But like I brought up on the show, you put Ray Lewis as the head coach of a college football team, we're going to be talking about that team. We're not going to be ignoring Ray Lewis. Even if the results aren't there right away, we're still going to be talking about it. I would imagine for recruits, there are certain doors that FAU might not get opened, but Ray Lewis all of a sudden is the coach. Maybe that piques the interest of some players that it didn't before. So you're definitely going to get a level of relevancy there. And I don't know what it would look like with him being a head coach at FAU, but I do know that we've seen him be a leader of men before. I do know that we've seen him galvanize a team and be a voice that helps get people pull the rope in the same direction. And I would imagine that if Ray Lewis is a head coach, he's going to bring a certain level of toughness to a team and a program. So you already have some sort of an identity. And
imagine those halftime speeches, Michelle.
I can't. Can you imagine the post
projected into my veins?
I want it to happen. I think it would be amazing. As somebody who would get to listen to those post-game press conferences and have just a glimpse into the way that he motivates a team, sign me up.
I have 3 YouTube speeches saved from him, like immediately. Like the boosters are going up right now. Like talked me into it. That just pumped me up. Last couple, and I'll let you go. This industry is very unique, especially for women. And I get asked a lot, like, how do you maintain a social life? And you do have relatively, I guess, normal people hours, all things considered, but it is still part, I mean, considered, like, I mean, I cover baseball, so it's weird. But as far as that goes, how do you maintain a social life in such a unique industry, or do you?
Oh gosh, that's such a complicated question because I don't know if I have a set answer for that. It's kind of day to day.
Mhm.
During the football season, particularly, if I could say that word, it's hard because there's Sunday, obviously, we're working, we're watching all of the games. We are sending notes to each other. We're writing notes to ourselves about what we want to talk about. We're reading, we're watching various games. If we can't catch a certain game, we're watching the highlights. We are sending in different updated commercials. Sunday is a work day. We are working the entirety of the day, but we're staying up late on Sunday to watch Sunday Night Football.
Mhm.
Then on Monday, we're up at 4, we're doing the show, and we're staying up late to watch Monday Night Football. Then on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, there may be a basketball game that we need to watch. On Thursdays, you've got Thursday Night Football. This past Friday, we had to watch the fight because we knew everyone's going to be talking about Mike Tyson and Jake Paul, right? So we're watching the fight. Oh, and then guess what? On Saturday, we're watching college football because we need to be able to talk about college football.
So I'm a liar. You don't have normally. I'm a freaking liar.
It's very complicated. The schedule's complicated and it's difficult. In the summertime, it's a little easier because you don't have as rigid of a viewing schedule. But my friends know, people in my life know that if they want to hang out with me, it's like we're talking like an early bird special. It's like a 4 p.m., 5 p.m. dinner. You know what your girl loves? A happy hour. I love a happy hour.
Yeah.
We could go at 4. I could be home by 6. If I need to watch the game, we're ready to go. If it's a Friday, I can be in bed by a healthy time. I don't know about you, but I have an Aura ring that, for those who don't know, it's a ring that you have that tracks your sleep and your activities, and it gives you feedback on your body and your health trends. And during the fall, every day I'll wake up and I'll open the app and it gives you a sleep score. And it's basically like, are you okay? Like, it's like, are you going to
go to sleep or
to make it through today? It usually says something like, watch out, watch out. Today is going to be bad. I'm like, this is like the 62nd day in a row that it said, watch out. This can't be good. So I don't necessarily have a social life, but I try and work in some things when I can. And if there's something that's really important to me, like an event or, seeing people who are in town, I'll just go on no sleep the next day. I think the 3 of us have kind of really figured out a way to power through the 4 hours without a lot of sleep, which is not necessarily the healthiest thing in the world.
Right.
But at the end of the day, we have a pretty fun job where we get to hang out and talk sports all day. So I'm not complaining.
Do you deal with it where it's sometimes like, since socializing is part of the job, you feel like you're kind of socializing, so it kind of checks the box sometimes?
You know what? That's interesting. I've never thought of it that way.
Because I feel sometimes
you're
I'm like,
right.
well, I socialized. I talked to like 17 people today. I am good.
You're like, oh, wait. In the press box, I hung out with these 7 people.
We're good.
Well, I do think in this industry, we have a lot of people tend to make really close friendships and have those really good relationships because we do spend a lot of time together and we are working together probably an inordinate amount of time at weird hours. And, you always get to learn about people too when you travel. Like, learn a lot about your friends or your family or your significant other when you travel with them. And not only do we travel for work, I feel like when you go to a ballpark or you're like going somewhere else for work in that way, you do kind of get to learn people pretty intimately. And so I would say, that it does feel like we're socializing a lot because we are friends. So I guess technically we're hanging out.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've never thought about that. But we hang out together sometimes outside of work. Like, we actually just planned a big karaoke night that's coming up.
Heck yeah.
So, I'm nervous about it though because I'm not a good singer, and I don't know if you have listened to the show when Chris Canty sings, but he's an amazing singer. So, and our hair and makeup team at least 2 of the 3 I know are very good singers, and they're the ones that planned all of this. So I think I'm going to be the odd duck here that just can't carry a tune. But either way, we're going to have a good time.
Have you decided on your song yet?
Oh, of course. So anytime that I karaoke, I have one song that I do.
Okay.
And that's because I don't want to punish the audience by me
For sure.
trying to sing, but I also want to have a song that I know the audience will enjoy and could
Uh-huh.
potentially sing along to drown me out. And
Smart.
that song is Shoop. I do
Smart.
Shoop because you're like
Oh,
rap
yes.
singing. It's not really like you're singing, but
Okay.
everybody loves Shoop. Who doesn't want to sing along to Shoop?
You're so right.
That's
a good
that's the one.
strategy. And yeah, I do the same. I try to make sure I'm like an hour in, so I know they've had a couple of drinks,
Smart.
right? Like you want to make sure like they don't, like you sound better after a couple of drinks. This is just true.
Always. Do you have a
Yeah.
go-to song?
It's actually Pour Some Sugar on Me by Def Leppard.
Ooh, that's a good one too.
I don't know why. I just
along.
love it. I just love it so much. It just like, it makes me so happy. And there's times where like I try to do a rap song, but like that's when I get too confident and it never really ends well, you know, like it's
Totally.
just, yeah. Last one before I let you go,
Okay.
you know how, or your makeup people have taught you very well how to cover a black eye with makeup.
Yes.
I would love to hear the story
Sure.
and how you can cover a black eye for future references, because I'm very clumsy.
Well, I hope that you don't sustain a black eye anytime in the future, but just in case you do, I do have some tips. So before the tips, the story is this. So when we first got word that we were going to be doing the show, the number one thing I was concerned about is the wake up call. 4 a.m. is no joke, and I am not a morning person. So leading into the first show, I was like, okay, for a week, I am going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, even though I don't need to. I need to train myself so that when we debut this show, I'm ready to go. I'm my freshest self, which it turned out to be anything but that. But that weekend leading in to the show was Labor Day. So all my friends, my family, everyone in my life, they go away for Labor Day weekend. And I'm like, you know what? I'm staying in New York. I'm going to stay in New York, get up at 4 a.m. I'm going to get in my new routine. So everyone's gone. I use this as an opportunity to deep clean my place. I'm like, okay, we are going to really lock in and we are going to start this new job and this new schedule on the freshest of foots.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm deep cleaning my apartment, and I live in a very small New York City apartment. And my couch is against the wall, and then there's a chair kind of on the side of it. And in between that, I have an air purifier. So I have the air purifier plugged in, and then I'm vacuuming, and I have the other plug on top of the air purifier. So I'm doing my thing, I'm vacuuming, and I'm trying to vacuum underneath the couch. And I am a very clumsy person. When Chris, Evan, and I sat down for the very first time, we went around the horn and we were like, all right, quick, what do we need to know about each other? Like, tell us one thing that we need to know, one thing to expect, one thing that you don't ever want to have to really get into. Just we need to kind of really get to know each other at rapid fire here. And I told them, I was like, guys, I'm very clumsy.
Okay.
I'm going to hurt at some point in our working relationship together. I'm going to hurt myself. I'm just warning you. When I first met Evan for lunch, I hit my head on a lamp at a restaurant. So I had already proven that to be true. So anyway, I'm vacuuming. I trip over the air purifier cord. As I fall forward, my coffee table is right there in front of me. There's a drinking glass on the table. As I'm falling, before I can steady myself, I hit my face on the drinking glass on the table, and I bust my eye. I know people are like, that's the most ridiculous story. That's exactly what happened. So it's like a half moon right here of a cut / a bruise. I touch my face. I feel blood. I look in the mirror. It's all red. I FaceTime my mom, and I'm like, I'm crying. I'm like, Mom, I just fell. And she's like, oh my God, your face. So as we're talking, it's becoming redder. You can see the bruise start to develop. This was 2 days before the start of the show. This is my national television debut.
Yes.
I've never been on national television before. So I Google it. I put a lot of ice on it. I'm like, how do I get rid of this? I go and I get the arnica gel. I'm trying my best to minimize it before the first day. So day one, it was not gone. It had really developed. It was not only black and blue, it was like that weird shade of green.
Yeah.
And so I had to go into hair and makeup pretty early on day one and be like, hi, I'm Michelle. It's so great to meet you. Really excited to work with you. I have a black eye. Can you help me? And they covered it up. You would never have been able to tell had we not talked about it and you zoomed in. But what I learned in covering it up, it's a lot of color correcting. So like to cover things up, it's not just your basic foundation or your basic
Be the
concealer.
opposite color, right?
It's green that they put on
Ooh.
that helps offset and kind
Okay.
of minimize the color. And then, yeah, they just spackled it right on. And you do a lot of setting powder over it,
Mm.
and then a lot of contour on other parts of your face to distract from the monstrosity that is your black eye. So again, I hope you never have to deal with it. But if you do, you give me a call. I've got some tips.
I think it's just good to know for like whatever else could happen.
Well, it was kind of
Like,
great that it did happen that way because I was like, you know what? A, this is me. I warned you that I'm clumsy and that this was going to happen. And B, this is probably the worst thing that's ever going to happen. On day
true.
one, me showing up with a black eye, I was not like heading into it. I was really nervous about the beginning of the show just because it was such a massive opportunity. And I wanted to hold up my end of the bargain and be great for my teammates. But then I was like, this is by far the worst thing that could ever happen.
Get it out of the way. Get it out of the way.
It's just out of the way. Anything else is all up from here. And it ended up being a great first show. And it's been a great first year.
I like how maybe they were like, oh, I'm sure you're clumsy. And you walk in like, no, seriously.
I have a self-inflicted black eye.
I'm sure she's clumsy. No. Like,
I told you guys. I warned you.
I don't think you understand.
Yep.
Michelle, this was awesome. Thanks so much for stopping by. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Jessica.
Sure. That was Michelle Smallmon of ESPN Radio. Unsportsmanlike is her show. You can listen to it 6 to 10 Eastern on ESPN Radio. Great show. Her and Chris Canty and Evan every single morning. Thanks for stopping by. On Awful Announcing, this is Short and to the Point. Jessica Kleinschmidt here, and we'll see you next time.
Want even more short and to the point? Follow Jessica at KleinschmidtJD and head over to thecomeback.com and awfulannouncing.com.